This episode is sponsored by Circle K. Get the most savings on every gallon when you fuel with the Circle K Fleet Card. Learn more at CircleKFleetCards.com.
Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine, which is sponsored by Circle K. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the fleet industry for the week of March 28th, 2022. And for this week's episode, I'd like to share with everyone an email I received from a regular viewer of this weekly video. And the reason for sharing the email is that this viewer offers a very unique perspective of what we've all been experiencing for the past 2 years. And for those of us actively involved day to day in the fleet industry, we've all witnessed dramatic changes in our businesses and companies, but we've been watching these changes occur incrementally, or in the case of this video series, we've been chronicling these changes on a week-by-week basis. But when you watch something develop incrementally, sometimes you don't appreciate the true scale of change that's occurred. And a good analogy to make this point would be when you're watching a child grow up. As a parent raising a child, you can see the child grow incrementally month to month, year to year. But for someone who hasn't seen the child for a couple of years, the change is dramatic. Typically, the words that you hear is, "I can't believe how much they've grown." The same analogy applies to the fleet industry. And this was captured in this email that I received yesterday from a longtime fleet professional. So here's the excerpted quote. "I contracted a very rare respiratory disease, which forced me to stop working in early 2020, and I spent the rest of 2021 recovering. Since then, I made a full recovery, but when I re-entered the fleet industry, I felt like Rip Van Winkle. I woke up to an entirely different fleet world from what I left in 2020. But before going further, for the benefit of our international viewers who may not be familiar with the term Rip Van Winkle, it's the name of a fictional character in a short story who falls asleep and wakes up 20 years later to a completely different and changed world. In fact, he doesn't even recognize this new world to which he's awakened. So when you compare the fleet world of early 2020 to today's fleet world of 2022, without examining all of the things that happened in between, this new fleet world of 2022 would almost be unrecognizable. And think about it, if someone told you in 2019 or early 2020 that in the next 24 months, there'd be unprecedented changes that would be occurring throughout the industry, and these changes would range from the shutdown of every assembly plant in North America due to a pandemic, to the emergence of a widespread series of supply disruptions that would demonstrate almost overnight the fragility of our just-in-time manufacturing system, to today's difficulties in sourcing replacement vehicles due to the huge pent-up end-user demand that's exceeding new vehicle production volumes. I mean, if you heard all of these things, you couldn't help but be a little skeptical. Change just doesn't occur that quickly. But in our case, it did. Change did indeed occur that quickly. In fact, the fleet industry has experienced more change in the past 24 months than at any time in its 83-year history since its founding in 1939. And the question from those of us today who've been living through this upheaval is, how long will this volatility, how long will this unpredictability continue in the fleet industry? And the growing consensus among fleet professionals, at least the ones that I've been speaking with, is that these disruptions are going to continue for at least the foreseeable future. And here's what one fleet manager told me, and she's not alone in this assessment. So, quote, "Unfortunately, the fleet disruptions caused by COVID will have a much bigger and longer impact that will extend far beyond what anyone initially expected," end of quote. So this is probably a very valid statement, and let's examine this concern and see where these disruptions may be continuing beyond our expectations. And one good place to look is this ongoing microchip shortage. And this is a classic situation where the goalpost continues to be moved. So the first glimpse of the microchip shortages appeared in the fourth quarter of 2020, and we heard bits and pieces here and there. And ultimately, a forecast was made that the shortage was to end by the second quarter of 2021, but this didn't happen. And then the forecast was reassessed and a new consensus was developed that the shortage should end by the fourth quarter of 2021. But again, this didn't happen. And now here we are at the end of the first quarter of 2022, and the microchip shortage still continues to impact the automotive production to this week. And here are some examples of recent announcements. So most recently, GM announced that its Fort Wayne assembly plant that assembles a Silverado and Sierra pickup trucks will stop production for 2 weeks starting April 4th due to the chip shortage. And as we all know, the chip shortage and supply chain disruptions is not restricted to just the US. It continues to be a global issue. So here are some other examples. Mazda announced that it'll temporarily suspend production at 2 assembly plants in Japan next month in April due to these supply constraints. And the same issues are occurring in the Chinese auto industry. Geely, which is the third largest Chinese automaker and among the top 10 global OEMs, said last week in a March 23rd statement, quote, "The global shortage of chip supply shows no signs of subsiding," end of quote. And these OEMs are not unique, but sometimes, the microchip shortages are a result of an act of nature that we have no control over. So a classic example is just last week, Renesas Electronics Corp., a major producer of automotive microchips, halted production at its 3 plants in Japan following the 7.4 magnitude earthquake that occurred on March 16th, last week. And if you remember, last year in 2021, Renesas production was shut down temporarily due to a fire at one of its facilities. Renesas is a major supplier of microchips to many automakers around the world, ranging from Toyota, Ford, and Honda. Another disruption that may continue to persist is the difficulty in sourcing replacement vehicles. And so, for instance, there continues to be this huge pent-up demand as a result of canceled fleet orders that are moved from one model year to the next. And as a result, some fleet managers are now predicting that this will continue and we may be experiencing new vehicle shortages as late as model year 2024 due to this ongoing carryover of canceled orders and the creation of this added volume of pent-up demand. In addition, fleet acquisition costs are increasing, and so long as demand is higher than production, OEMs have no need to stimulate demand and will moderate or decrease factory fleet incentives. In fact, the average capitalized cost of a fleet vehicle has increased from $34,000 to more than $39,000 in the past year. And I started this video with an excerpt from an email that I received from a fleet professional, and I'd like to conclude this week's report with another excerpt from that very same email on what helped this fleet professional get up to speed with all of the changes that occurred between the onset of his illness to his full recovery. And here's what he wrote, quote, "The weekly State of the Fleet industry updates became one of my lifelines. It kept me connected and provided valuable information, allowing me to reconnect with colleagues. This weekly video will serve as a valuable history for this turbulent time. Congratulations as you approach your 100th episode." So with that, I like to make this my final observation, and I like to conclude my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of March 28th, 2022, and I want to thank you for watching.